he and his wife had discussed the possibility, since it was really tough to make a living as a staymaker at that time, that he might, because he was at least literate and smart, that he might take the exam to become an excise officer, basically a duties, an excise officer is sent to the coast and the port cities to inspect cargoes and literally tax the incoming cargo, you might say, okay, charge the tax on the cargoes. And the idea came up because her father had been an excise officer. So he goes home to his own parents' house in Thetford, England, and he trains, or he studies to take the exam. He passes the exam, and he's appointed an excise officer, and he serves on the coast. And being an excise officer was not an easy thing. You had to patrol the coast, you had to inspect cargo, and a lot of villages on the coast were not very keen on excise officers as duties collectors. A lot of villages on the coast actually depended upon what they hoped to be shipwrecks, okay? That is, ships that would come too close to shore and run aground, or run into the rocky shoreline, and then the cargoes themselves would be liberated by the natural elements, and the whole village would turn out to lay claim to boxes and crates that would be flowing off the ship. And his job was basically to keep an eye out for these kinds of activities. So anyhow, Paine was accused of doing something illegal called stamping. That is, it was such a tough job that sometimes there were excise officers who didn't actually inspect the cargoes in the ports. They would just stamp them. And this way, maybe the captain of the ship or the men receiving, or the merchants receiving the cargo would pay them, a bit of money on the side. It was corruption. He was accused of being involved in a stamping activity, though it's funny. I say funny because a couple of weeks later, his own boss is fired, apparently, which may mean that his boss was actually the guilty party and accused Paine, and Paine may have just been the fall guy in the whole thing. Well, Paine is pretty determined that he's going to be reinstated, so he begins the petition process to be reinstated, but that's going to take a couple of years. I mean, it's slow moving. It might have even been as much as 3 years. And in the process, he's got to survive. So he moves back to London, and he makes a living in part by teaching children of the middle class, okay, how to read and write and calculate, okay. He also does some preaching for Methodists on Sundays out in fields. Now, he doesn't get paid for doing that kind of thing, but it does provide him with a social life and with food, a good Sunday meal. And in fact, it also gave him all the more experience of having to craft a powerful sentence, because he's going to give sermons at times. Well, eventually he does get reinstated, and he's been living in a state of poverty. But anyhow, reinstated, he's sent to the South Coast, to a village called Rye, which is a really pretty place on the South Coast. And he becomes a very, if you like, respected member of the community. Now, he doesn't have a lot of money or anything. It's not like he's a wealthy guy who wins respect because he has money. It's because he becomes a part of, because of the home in which he's living with the storekeeper, man named Samuel Olive. Olive brings him into a group called the Headstrong Company, which is a group of men, artisans, and small business people who meet at the White Hart Tavern on the High Street in Lewes, Lewes. That's the town, Lewes. I apologize. Rye is a bit along the coast. I knew some people who lived in Rye. But there at the White Hart Tavern, they would eat, drink, and debate public affairs. And they would debate public affairs on everything from the American Rebellion to, the power of the crown. I mean, you name the subject, and they did. He also became respected because apparently he was a damn good ice skater. And on the streams and lakes nearby, he was so good an ice skater, they called him the Commodore, because he could move like he was captaining a ship. So anyhow, he becomes well known. And also there, he starts to write a bit for the company. In other words, the best debater each week got to keep the notebook for the group. And you knew how many times, and you knew that Paine was a good man with words, because he was the one who kept the book more often than anyone else. Well, here's the story, okay? Here's the story. Excise officers were very poorly paid. And the excise officers were kind of disgruntled with the state of affairs, and they decided it was time to petition the Excise Commission up in London, and if necessary, lobby Parliament to get a raise for all the excise officers. And Paine had a reputation as being a man of words, that he knew how to use words. So in a meeting, which was probably an illegal meeting to begin with, a gathering of excise officers chose him to be their spokesperson, that he should go to London, he should write a petition, go to London and present the petition and lobby members of Parliament. And he wrote not a pamphlet, but he wrote a document entitled The Case of the Excise Officers. And in it, he makes a good case as to why they should raise the wages, that there's too much temptation for corruption, that here are all the expenses we have to accumulate or put out. And, given our income, it's tough to accumulate any kind of savings. And it's a really interesting little document. It's not fancy in any way, but it shows you that he can make an argument. And he goes to London and he spends quite a while there. Now, keep in mind, going to London meant probably someone had to cover for his what would you call it? His precinct that he was responsible for.
His position, right?
His position, exactly. And what happens, of course, is it's illegal what he's doing.
Right. Yeah.
For a start, it's illegal for any kind of what we would think of as union activity to take place.
Yeah.
And this, in essence, is a labor action. That's number one. Number two, he's abandoned his post.
Right.
Okay. Now, and what happens is that in time he's going to be fired again, or as they say in England, sacked. But along the way, he meets very prominent people in London as he's lobbying. And he's making a damn good impression on them. And one of the people whom he meets, and we don't know if it's the first time he meets him or the second time he meets him, but one of the men he meets is Benjamin Franklin. And by this time, Franklin is already recruiting people with the idea of they're going to of these young men or middle-aged men, if they're prominent, to go to America and perhaps contribute to the American colonial rebellion. So now we're in the early 1770s, basically 1773, 74. And Franklin must see Paine's talent with words. And he recommends to Paine, when he's fired, that Paine move to America. And that is Paine's plan. So with what little money he has, because he's been sacked and he's been, I don't even know if he's been paid for some time, he heads to America with a letter of reference, of recommendation from Franklin. Again, it's not a fancy one, but it's a good paragraph making it clear that this is somebody that you should pay attention to. And he directs Paine to go to Philadelphia and show the letter around. Keep in mind that Benjamin Franklin is the most famous person in the entire Atlantic world of the 1770s and the 1780s. The guy is world renowned as something of a statesman for America, and also as an inventor. So Paine goes to America and arrives in Philadelphia. He barely survives the voyage, by the way.